So the topics for today, we're going to go over some very quick definitions in terms of what we're talking about, and we're going to discuss how it can impact your hotel and then how you can get it done as well. So you might be wondering, is this for me? If you work for a hotel with maybe 20 to 200 rooms, this probably is going to be useful to you. Also, if you're responsible for driving revenue to your hotel, it's also going to be very useful. That could be sometimes a marketing manager. Sometimes there's a dedicated revenue manager. Sometimes we work with the general manager themselves because they like to really have control over pricing. Sometimes even the sales department. So it can be different people that handle revenue management in a smaller hotel. But if you're responsible for revenue, then this will be interesting to you. Or if you're new to revenue management completely, maybe this is a career progression or something like that. And maybe you just lack time to learn it all and you have some other type of a job. You just don't have time to learn it all or do it all, then this is for you. So maybe you have some of these objectives in your hotel. You'd like to increase reservations by 10%, maybe 50%. And we've seen numbers that are pretty dramatic when some of these things are implemented. Maybe you want to raise your average daily rate by 5% or even 20%. And maybe you want to do both of those things, right? Which is kind of like a RevPAR measure. And you want to get your revenue up 20, 30% perhaps, and rates and availability flowing out automatically to all of the channels, and no parity problems, all of this with a lot less drama and stress, right? So how do you get here if maybe you're in a very different place over here to the left? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So you need some sort of a process, right? Maybe a framework, maybe a map, maybe a guide. You know, you have to have an idea and then a plan, and then you have to put that plan into action. And then even after you put it into action, plan A might turn into plan B, which might turn into plan C. So you have to be willing to make changes. And depending on your starting point, I have seen this evolve for a lot of different hotels. And it's a continuous process for maybe several weeks, maybe several months even. I have hotels who are still, after several years, still kind of tweaking the process and changing things a little bit. But you do have to have some consistency there. Otherwise, you end up kind of just wandering around aimlessly like this little mouse here. So let's get some definitions out of the way. So revenue management, this is a widely accepted definition, right? Selling the right room to the right client at the right moment for the right price through the right distribution channel with the best cost efficiency. Well, frankly, this applies to any business. This is not a definition that I love. I mean, it's not wrong. But it can be applied to any business. It's not, really unique to revenue management. Also, it's not very actionable, and I think it's a little bit boring. So let's talk a bit about what you're really selling. Are you selling rooms? I think most hotels are actually selling dates, right? And this is an important distinction as we talk about revenue management and yield management. So let's talk about that as well real quick. So yield management is specifically the room revenue. And then non-room revenue is also part of revenue management, but not usually part of yield management, especially for smaller hotels. So yield management, then, this is a definition that I like a little bit better. You're pricing each room type by date based on supply, which is your inventory, and demand, which is, your sold rooms or your reservations, and that is an indication of demand. And perishability, which is the amount of time you have left to sell those rooms. That's a very important thing. And it's hard to kind of measure and conceptualize, right? And of course, the competition we always have to look at. Some people start with the competition, but most academics and software companies and best practices will tell you that you can maximize revenue if you don't look at the competition first. So you do have to look at that, but it should not be your primary or your only driver, or you'll be, letting other hotels dictate your pricing strategy, and their pricing strategy is based on their availability, perhaps. So anyway, there's a bunch of reasons for that. So the first thing I want to point out, and maybe you know this already because that's why you're here, but this is important. These are a bunch of associations that call it a critical tool for hotels to maximize revenue and profitability, key to success in the hotel industry, essential tool for hotels to maximize revenue and profitability, and a critical strategy for hotels to compete in today's market. So in case you had any doubt, This is pretty important today. It was not so important 20, 30 years ago, but it is today. Now, it is complicated. It's a relatively new field of maybe 20, 30 years, and it was started with the airlines. But, a lot of these big hotel companies have been investing in this for a long time. So, they've been doing it for many years. They have a lot of software and large IT departments, and they have experts in revenue management and hospitality. And they have lots of data and analytics experts, and they can distribute those costs across many properties, which, independent boutique hotels cannot necessarily do. I will tell you that a lot of the quality of revenue management that they have in terms of software, as well as centralized people and so on, is not that great. I get a lot of calls from chains as well, talking about how, the advice they get is poor, or the software is very out of date. And they're paying for that, of course, as franchisees. So some of the challenges for smaller hotels, you probably know this, but expensive software and small IT departments, the lack of expertise and specialized skills. And most boutique hotels have simple needs, but a lot of the tools are very complicated. So why is it complicated? I'm going to kind of just take a very short detour here and talk about supply and demand in a little bit more detail. But basically, the intersection of supply and demand, just to get a little academic for a second, this is called the equilibrium price. And this, in theory, is the price where the market clears. In other words, all buyers and sellers are satisfied. And so this is the price where the market clears. Now, the reality is, right, demand can shift. And then, of course, the price shifts up or down as well. In this case, it shifts up. And, because supply did not change, demand changed. So the price went up and the quantity demanded went up. So this is kind of an ideal scenario. But the reality is, right, these demand curves are shifting around all the time, and supply curves are even shifting a little bit. And then, the equilibrium price is kind of moving around. And all of this is, I know, very theoretical, but it does get a little more complicated. And this is part of why it's complicated. But, you'll have a supply and demand curve for each of your room types. Let's say room type A, and then room type B, and room type C, and room type D. And that's just day one, right? So day 2, day 3, 4, day 5, all the way out to day 120 or whatever, the supply and demand curves are kind of shifting a little bit all the time, right? So all this data is in constant movement, and every day it changes a little bit, sometimes a lot, right? Depending on certain events. So the obstacles for smaller hotels are, where to get the data. We're going to talk about that in more detail, and how to process the data to get insights, because data is not very valuable if you cannot get insights, right? So insight is what you really want. And then you want to turn that insight into action. So these are the 3 critical steps: data, insights, and action. And we'll come back to that in a second in more detail. And of course, you guys are busy all day doing multiple jobs, and maybe you don't have dedicated technology or analytics experts or the funds to hire. So we're going to help you, come to some solutions on that. So why is this important for your business? In a word, it's leverage, right? And I'll talk about why in a second, but it's financial leverage. If we go all the way back to Archimedes, Greek philosopher, right? He said, if you give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, I'll move the world. And that fulcrum is kind of that thing in the middle there. But you can see that, you can lift a heavier rock with a lighter rock. And that's kind of the definition of leverage. And here's what it means in the hotel business, right? So if you have room nights sold, and scenario 1 versus scenario 2, right? In scenario 2, you have 14% more volume. But let's say you had to lower your rates by 5% to get that extra volume. Well, you still got an extra revenue there of about 9% more. Your variable expenses, by definition, they vary based on volume. So they go up by 14%, which is the same amount as volume. But your fixed expenses, by definition, are fixed. And so this is a simplified example. So those stay at 0% growth. And the profit goes up by 140%. So, there's many, many examples like this. But, in this case, a 14% growth in volume turn into a 140% growth in profit. So this is what I mean by leverage. And the important thing to take away here is that small changes can have really big impacts. And this is why the big chains invest in this, right? They're public companies with shareholders, that expect a certain return. So let's talk about elasticity for a second. This is another, I know it's academic, but we'll move into practical stuff soon. But, price is what you pay and value is what you get, is what, this is a quote from Warren Buffett. And this is obviously from the buyer's perspective, right? So you pay a price and value is what you get. So as a consumer shopping for, hotels on Expedia or Booking or on Google or wherever, right? If the price goes down, they get more value. Right. And the reverse is also true. So why am I pointing this out? It's because this is how the Expedia algorithm works. If you provide more value, or if Expedia senses, either through reviews or pricing or promotions or different things, if the Expedia algorithm detects that your hotel is a good value, then they're going to raise your visibility, and that's going to increase your reservations dramatically. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that. That's a little bit of a separate topic. It's more about channel management, but I think it's important here to keep this in mind for revenue management and yield management. So let's talk about elasticity. I'm just going to explain this briefly, but Hotel A might have an elasticity that is like this. And that means that if they drop their rates by $50, they get an extra 100 room nights in a given month, let's say, right? Hotel B might have a very different elasticity curve, which means when they drop rates by $50, they get an extra 200 room nights, right? And then Hotel C might be even different yet, right? They drop rates by $50 and they get an extra 300 room nights. Now, this, I've said, I've used this example with 3 different hotels, but it can also apply to different markets. It can also apply to different rooms in your hotel, right? So certain rooms might have different elasticities of demand, and that's basically how much extra volume do you get by a rate increase or decrease, right? And that's going to ultimately determine your total revenue. All right, so let's move from theory into practice. So, across the x-axis on the bottom here, we have time, and across the vertical axis there, we have occupancy, right? And obviously, we want our occupancy to be 100%. We don't always hit that number, but if we're operating consistently at 80, 90% in many markets, that's a pretty good business. So as time gets closer, we want our occupancy to be higher, right? Obviously, in the further out dates, we don't expect to be sold out, but it can happen, right? So one of the things that we want to do overall is to identify these periods out in the future where our occupancy is unusually low, right? And in some of those cases, we're going to find that maybe our competitors have already lowered their rates, and we need to lower rates as well, or we're going to end up with a lot of empty rooms, and that is even less revenue, right? And so that's one of the things that hurts revenue a lot in hotels, is a lot of empty rooms. The reverse is also true, which is you can identify periods where your occupancy is unusually high and you have a lot of time left. So in those cases, you should be raising rates. And this is why I mentioned before that you're really selling dates for the same room. You're not selling rooms, right? You're selling dates. And so if you can lower rates and get more occupancy on the periods when your occupancy is running a little behind, or if you can kind of increase rates when your occupancy is unusually high, then you're going to do very well. And overall, you can raise your ADR, and sometimes you can raise your ADR and your occupancy, both. And that results in higher total revenue, and that can really transform a business. So let's talk about how to do it then. So data sources and processing. So it all kind of starts with the PMS, right? This is where you get your occupancy. You can also automate this report in a lot of ways, or it can connect to a revenue management system directly. But the occupancy comes out of the PMS. The compset rates, they come out of Expedia has this for free. And then there's companies like OTA Insights, which is now called Lighthouse. They have additional details. And, it can be very useful as well, but that does cost some money. So you get your occupancy out of the PMS and your comp set rates for each of your room types. You want to have competitor rates, right? Now, one of the things that OTA Insights and Expedia does is they will suggest to you, Expedia is particularly good at this because they see all of the rooms that people are shopping across and then which ones they ultimately buy. And so even if a hotel, doesn't seem to you like a competitor, to the people shopping online, it is one of the choices that they are making. And so Expedia will very often kind of suggest to you who are your competing room types for each of your room types, right? So anyway, you pull out the occupancy for each room type by day. You do that for 100 days, 200 days, 300 days. And then the same thing with the comp set rates. You put that into a model. Now it can be Excel or a spreadsheet if you want to do it yourself, or it can be revenue management software, but they basically do the same thing, right? You're pulling in the occupancy for each of your room types and the competitor rates, and you're doing that for a whole bunch of dates in the future. And with Excel, you do have to have a lot of Excel skills as well as revenue management because you're building it yourself. You can set flags and things like that, and I'll show you a little bit of that. But ultimately, you want to have some insights that drive decisions that are informed decisions, right, about rate changes. So for example, once you combine all of that data, you want to be able to see out in the future, okay, these dates have higher occupancy, and maybe there's a lot of time left, and the competitors' rates are also a little bit higher, so we can raise rates on those dates. And also vice versa, right? If our occupancy is low and maybe there's not a lot of time, or maybe even there is, maybe the competitors have reduced rates, then we need to lower rates or we're going to have a lot of empty rooms. So once those decisions are made, then you need to implement these rate changes. Now, I'm going to go into some detail on this, and this may be something that a lot of you know already, and may be obvious to some, but I still see a lot of hotels kind of doing the implementation in a very inefficient way, and it prevents them from doing this often. So the implementation of all of this, it needs to be efficient because you want to be able to do it fairly quickly, and you want to do it at least once a week. I mean, really big hotels might do it every day. So I think boutique hotels should try to do it about once a week. So that means that you do need to be efficient with this process. So I'll get into some more detail on that. And you implement these rate changes into the PMS, basically at the rack rate, and then it pushes out to the channel management software. Hopefully all of your derived rates there, your promotions, your mobile rates, your refundable rates with and without breakfast, all of that stuff is usually derived in the channel management software, and then pushes out to your direct booking engine, as well as Expedia booking and other sites that you have. And so we'll get into a little more detail on that. And then those reservations, over time, over the next week or two, they start to come back into the PMS, and you kind of repeat the whole process again. So that's basically, how it works if you're going to kind of do it yourself, or even if you're setting up the revenue management software. This is all a data flow that you do need to understand. And a lot of people who just use revenue management software may not be aware of this, and it really hurts their decision-making abilities. So I don't expect you guys to read this, but this is an example of our template. This was developed, over many years, working with a lot of different hotels. And basically it's got the timeline running across the top, and you see some green and yellow and red there. And basically you have your occupancy, right? You layer in your occupancy for each room type. And I think this example here is just one room type. And you look at your occupancy day by day over time. And then you look at how much time is left, right? As time gets short, that row right there starts to turn a little red. Things start to get urgent. And then you also look at the comp set. And I think it's important to look at an average to smooth it out, because some hotels, maybe they're sold out, or they don't have a rate published that day. There's a number of things that can cause your competitor rates to bounce up and down kind of dramatically. If you're looking at a lot of different hotels, you should have 5 to 10 competitors in there. So taking an average is sometimes a good idea. If you want more detail on this, we have a video that spends 35 minutes, I think, on this. It goes into a lot of detail. For many years, it was #1 on YouTube, when you searched how to do revenue management. So if you really want to get into those details, you can look at that. The other thing I'll mention is, with artificial intelligence now, we have shifted our template a little bit to something more vertical where the dates run up and down. And that's because a lot of the artificial intelligence analytics tools work with Python, and Python understands data better if it's in vertical columns. So it's kind of a separate topic. We do have a program called AI for Hotels. It's at aiforhotels.com. You can find out more there. But I'll keep going here. So in terms of time and urgency then, right, this also varies by market, by season, by hotel, and really by your booking window. And so, some hotels might have a short booking window and their peak is in, a week or two. Other hotels might have a very long booking window and their peak might be in 60 or 80 days. Even for individual hotels in the Caribbean, in the low season, the average booking window is maybe 60 days, but then for high season, it goes much higher to an average of 110, 120 days prior to arrival. So that also, it's nice to have reservations that far in advance, but it also makes it difficult to predict and forecast things. And if you're wrong, then it's hard to make that up, right? Because they do not have a lot of last minute reservations. So urgency is different for different hotels, and you have to kind of define that yourself. So let's talk a little bit about compset. It is relative. So what do I mean by that? Your compset may have hotels that should be more expensive than yours and some that should be less. So maybe your correct position is to be right in the middle of the compset, but maybe your correct position is to be maybe in the bottom, 20% or the upper 20% of that distribution. The important thing is to maintain a consistent position within that competitive set. The hotels in your market really well, and you should be able to determine if you should be mostly at the upper end of that range or the lower end of that range or right in the middle. But I think the benchmark is to have a somewhat consistent position within the competitive set. That's kind of the idea. So now we're going to talk about implementation, right? So rate structure, I kind of hinted about this earlier, and now I'm going to show you a little bit more detail about what I mean. So let's say you have a property and it's called the Superhero Hotel, and you have 3 room types, right? Standard suite, super duper suite. And you have some base rates, right? Some people call this a rack rate. And, you might have a standard 15% add-on for breakfast. You should try not to change that all the time. You should have that fairly consistent. Obviously, you can change it every few months if you need to, or maybe, every couple of years, perhaps. But I think it helps to have that consistently adding the same amount all the time. And then you have refundability, which might be a 10% discount. And then package deals you have to give to Expedia might be a 10% discount there as well. And you might have a promotion for 10% or 15%. And then you might have a VIP promotion as well, which is very effective in the OTAs and also to get direct bookings. So, rate parity does not play much of a role when it comes to these VIP private promotions. So I think they can be very, very effective. And what we see a lot is that the vast majority of reservations and revenue can come in those VIP or secret promotions. So it's important to have a basic public promotion where you have rate parity, and then you have a VIP offer that's even better, and that's where you make your real money. Mobile is another thing I see a lot of hotels missing. A lot of volume will come in on mobile specific promotions. So don't forget about that. Sometimes it does layer on top of other promotions, so be careful on that, but sometimes it does not layer. So it depends on the channel. But all of these rates, right, can get very complicated to manage. So what you want to do if you're adjusting rates, day by day, week by week to do yield management, you want to adjust the base rate and then let all of these other derived rates more or less stay stable and just let everything flow through. And that way you can make the changes, every day if you want. You can adjust rates. But everything will flow through and you'll keep rate parity. If you break rate parity, I know there's different strategies and philosophies on this, but if you break rate parity unintentionally, then it can cost you a lot of money. I mean, I see a lot of hotels that are, don't even realize the cost they are paying for not having rate parity. And the cost is huge in terms of lost reservations and visibility and everything else. Now, if you have a very strong direct booking business, then, and you're making a conscious decision to not have rate parity, fine, more power to you, right? Direct bookings are obviously more profitable. But anyway, that's again a very separate topic around channel management. But I think it's important to have your channels properly structured and cleanly operating in order to change rates on a regular basis and to do it effectively. So how do you do this on a regular basis without making it a full-time job, which maybe a lot of you cannot afford to do this full time. So I'll give you a couple of different options. I mean, back in the old days when our company was started in 1999, the focus was a lot on distribution and visibility and parity across many different OTAs. We've always worked with smaller independent boutique hotels. And then channel management software, became accessible and affordable to many smaller hotels, and it automated a lot of these things and created a foundation for revenue management and some longer term strategic thinking. But before that, pricing was not strategic. There was a lot of panic selling. Rates were set by quarter or maybe by season. They were adjusted maybe 2 to 4 times a year based on memory and experience. And then if some of the guesses were wrong, which invariably will happen, right, for a certain period of a few weeks or a few months, there would be last minute panic selling with deep discounts, lowering the ADR, or a lot of rooms just went unsold, right? And so that was not good for the finances and also for people's emotional stress. But anyway, resorts also have long booking windows. So like I said before, it's hard to move a lot of inventory on short notice. So you have to really be thinking ahead, looking ahead, and you have to have the data to do that. So, we started to look further ahead. We found some data sources that were easy to find, and often free. As I mentioned, Expedia is free. OTA Insights, which is now Lighthouse, is also very affordable and has a lot of great features. And then you want to get some insight, and we found that we could obtain that by combining the availability data with the compset. And the action, as I just described, could also be taken every week if we really streamline the process. And so we started doing this on a regular basis with hotels, and it produced really great results. And, some clients did want a little bit more. And, we went out and looked for revenue management software in some cases, but it was always very complicated. Sometimes it had way too many features that smaller hotels really were not interested in at all. And so it was hard to even just do the basics because there were so many bells and whistles. And the setup fees and the training were very expensive, anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000. The software monthly fee was also pretty expensive, $1,000 to $2,000 per month, sometimes even more. And expert labor was also necessary, depending on whether you hire somebody to do this part-time or full-time. Depending on your market, it can be anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 a month and maybe even more. And in this case, right, you have to hire somebody who knows how to use the system and understands revenue management, because I've seen many cases where a hotel buys the software. Now they're locked in, paying all of these expenses for the software, and they don't know how to use it, and they're not getting any value out of it. And this is why actually a revenue management software vendor told me once, we need people like you, he was referring to me, to create processes and a culture of revenue management across different functions, right? General managers and marketing and finance and sales and IT. And so that the whole organization and all of the people involved kind of understand what needs to be done on a regular basis. And he said, if we sell our software into a smaller hotel that has no culture of revenue management, they will not get much value out of the software. So, we kind of kept refining and improving our process after going through some of those experiences. And it reminded me also of Bill Gates' 2 rules of automation. The first rule is automation applied to an efficient process magnifies the efficiency. Rule 2 is that automation applied to an inefficient process will magnify the inefficiency. And I've seen this create chaos in small hotels. So automation is not always a good thing if you don't have a good process. So we kind of kept refining and improving our process. And we realized all of this really boils down to 2 questions, right? Which dates need higher rates and which dates need lower rates? And, you know, the difficulty, I guess, is that it needs to be by day, as we talked about, and by room type. And you need to do it for, you know, 100 or 200 days. And you need to repeat it about once a week. And that's where the difficulty comes in for most boutique hotels. So eventually we kind of landed on a ideal mix of features, you know, that has no new software to buy, no integration with existing software, no new employees, no software training, and includes a live weekly meeting. So we kind of developed our own little bundle here called Yield Box, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So here's how it works basically. You know, you set up an automated occupancy email. You provide Expedia access, which is read only. I think it's called Analyst View or something like that. Does not allow anybody to make changes to your listing on Expedia, but allows you know, an analyst to download the compset data. And then we do a little bit of magic, and then you receive a weekly email with a simple list of which changes to make. You also get a detailed spreadsheet if you want to go through that, and a weekly meeting, which is optional. I mean, you can have a meeting every week and discuss all of it with us. But very often what happens is hotels are busy, and that's why they hire us. And so after they learn the process and kind of trust it a little bit more, they don't even want to have the weekly meeting anymore. And so we just send them rates, and they implement and then see the results. So all that's involved in implementing then is changing a few rack rates in the PMS. Usually it takes about 20 minutes a week. Very often at our client, very often the general manager likes to make those changes, but sometimes it's somebody else. So, you know, it's pretty quick, especially when you're doing this on a weekly basis. You know, you're not changing all of the rates, right? You're just changing here and there. You're starting to just fine tune it. Also, you retain control. I think that's another important feature. I think with a lot of the software automations, you know, I had a lot of general managers who did not like the suggestions from the automated tools. And you don't want that pushing and changing your rates and pushing them all the way out to the market if you don't agree with them. So very often, you know, our clients, they'll agree with 80, 90% of the recommendations. And then maybe there's some where they're like, you know what, this one here, I'm not going to make that change. Or I think, you know, rates need to go down or up. So ultimate control resides with them. Now, some of them still say, hey, I want you to just go into my PMS and just go ahead and make the changes. So we also do that as well. And then the updates just kind of flow out to all of the channels, and it's done. So, you know, I'll give you a cost comparison, even though that's not what should drive the decision. You should really decide based on ROI on something like this. But, you know, we've talked about some of these options, so we might as well line them up here. But in terms of software, right, these are kind of one-time expenses. That's why they're in gray. These are very conservative, low estimates, right? So $500 maybe to set it up, $1,000 for training. As I said before, these numbers can be a lot higher just to get started. And then the monthly fee is very often around $1,000 a month. Sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher, but $1,000 a month is not unusual. And then a salary, this also varies a lot by market, obviously, or even if somebody is full-time, it's going to be more. This $3,000 a month is probably for somebody who is part-time in many markets. So that's kind of your total cost there to do revenue management, right, on a monthly basis. If you do it yourself, you really have just the salary, but you do have to have somebody who really knows how to set up revenue management in a spreadsheet. And they're going to have to dedicate at least a portion of their time. Maybe this is full-time or part-time salary, depending on your market. But you know, it takes time. Also, they're going to have to develop a model over the course of several months before it really starts to feel right. And then, ours is just $1,000 a month, and we add in a little token amount of $50 for salary there. But like I said, sometimes we even go in and, make the entries into the PMS ourselves. So it's certainly a cost competitive solution, and that's the way it's designed. So if you're ready for something new for the next couple of months, you can get 50% off this solution for the first 2 months of service. And it is month to month, so there's no long-term obligation. And enrollment is limited to 5 new clients per month because we need to kind of maintain quality. We can't have too many clients starting all at once. So that's kind of what's going on here. And then if you want to kind of take the next step, you can scan that code or go to that URL and you can schedule a call with us. If you really want a little bit more information and want to discuss the specific needs of your property, we're happy to do a private one-on-one consultation. If you want to sign up and you're ready to get started and lock in the 50% discount and secure one of the 5 spots, there's also a link there where you can just basically make that purchase. And we do not want to charge anybody money for services that they don't want, right? So if you decide at the first onboarding call within 2 weeks, if you decide, this really is not for us, you can cancel at no cost and we'll return whatever money you might have paid it to that point. So if you go to that page, you can schedule the call or you can go ahead and just sign up. So what happens when you sign up? You get an immediate email with a link to schedule your onboarding call within 2 weeks. And then you also get the instructions for 2 simple tasks. This is the email that we use for this service. And you basically create an occupancy report in the PMS and have it sent automatically to that inbox every week. We would prefer that it not be Monday because Mondays are already kind of crowded. So Tuesday through Friday are good or better. But if you have to have it Monday, we can certainly accommodate that. And then you create an analyst user in Expedia Partner Central. That is another thing that takes basically 2 minutes to do. And that's it. And then in a few days, you would receive your first email with suggested rates. So, what happens if you don't change, right? Some people say the same old thinking gives you the same old results, but that's not the world we live in anymore, right? Because the rest of the world is not standing still. And AI is coming, or for many of you, it's already here, right? And we are using AI as well, and we're going to use a lot more of it. So, I'll have more to say on that subject in the coming weeks, but AI is going to be a real game changer in many ways. It's going to level the playing field, and a lot of smaller hotels are going to be able to compete more effectively. But you have to really know what you're doing, and not only know all the revenue management stuff we talked about, but also know how to implement AI into that. Because I can tell you that, even though we've been doing it for many years, it has still taken some testing and some trial and error. So, all right. Let's see. Okay, so we're here already at the Q&A, and let's see. I'll leave the code up there where you can schedule the call or sign up, and I'll kind of pause here for a second and see if there's any questions. Okay, here's a question about, yeah, I get this question a lot actually. So what is the turnaround time? So from the time that we get the data, the occupancy data, which, needs to be fresh every week. So from the time we get that data, it takes us about 24 hours to turn that around. Sometimes it's faster. If we get it in the morning, sometimes we send the report by the afternoon with all of the suggested rates. And then also in terms of setting up your meeting, there's a lot of open time slots. We always make sure to have plenty of open time slots, and usually that's with me. If you do schedule a call, you want to talk about your specific property, that's usually with me. Also on an ongoing basis, that is something that I usually attend and can, explain all of the decisions that we've made every week. let's see what else. Okay, there's a question about revenue management software. So, I've worked with a lot of different ones. I don't know if I can recommend a specific one without knowing more about your property. I think, uh, and I also don't like to throw anyone under the bus. But I think, a lot of these revenue management software, what the biggest benefit is that it automates a lot of these things, or it just speeds up the manual process, right? So for example, if you, once the revenue management software is connected to your PMS, it's going to get the data that it needs, like the occupancy and the current rates and all of that. It's also going to pull in the competitor rates fairly automatically, maybe daily. It depends on which application or what kind of integration you have. But that data is going to get refreshed very often. And then it helps you kind of with different flags and alerts and notifications and things like that, and tools that they have in the software. It helps you see very quickly which dates need maybe higher rates and which dates need lower rates, based on the occupancy and the time left and the competitors. So it's the same basic variables that we've been talking about, right? But it packages it in a way that you can very quickly see where the problems or the opportunities are, and then you can take action, right? So once you get the insight and you see a problem or an opportunity somewhere, you can say, okay, on those dates for that room type, I'm going to raise rates by $20. And on these, I'm going to lower rates by $10. And you can implement it right in the revenue management software, and it pushes automatically to the PMS, which then pushes automatically to the channel management software, and then out to all the channels. Now that's an ideal world. I can tell you that it does not work that cleanly for a lot of our hotels. So it does take a lot of work to keep all of those connections working properly. There's a lot of different rates, and there's a lot of different little changes that can kind of throw things off, but that's the advantage. I mean, certainly if you have the money to invest, that is the way to go, right? Now you still have to hire a person who knows how to operate it, and that's important. It's kind of like buying a plane. I don't know how to fly a plane, and so if I suddenly came into possession of a plane, it would not be much use to me, right? I'd have to certainly take quite a bit of training to learn how to fly that safely. And it's a similar thing with revenue management software. So I think that's it for today. Let me see if there's any other questions on YouTube. I don't see anything else there. I'm going to do a quick check here, and I think that's all the questions, but I'll leave you with just a little bit of, let me just make sure there's no more questions. So, all right. So here's the email. You can also send an email there as well. I gave this yieldbox@resortincome.com. I gave this email out. That's where we receive the occupancy on a weekly basis. But you can also send an email there. There are human beings who look at that inbox, so you can send us an email there. And like I said, if you want to take advantage of this or set up a call with me, we can talk about your property individually. Just scan that code or go to that URL, and we can talk about your property a little bit more. And if you're ready to sign up, there's not much risk in going ahead and signing up and getting the ball rolling, and we can do that pretty quickly. So anyway, thank you all for joining again. And we'll have this every week. If you want to join again, it might be a little repetitive. I think over time we will try to start varying the topics, but for the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a pretty similar kind of a webinar. So feel free to join, but it may not vary a lot. So if you're subscribed to our emails, we'll also be sending out more updates there in terms of additional topics, or you can tell us what other topics you'd like to hear about, and we're happy to talk about those live once a week. And also AIforhotels.com, if you're interested in some of those things. That's a program that we're still kind of in the process of kicking off, and that'll probably launch in in a couple of weeks, but you can get some information by going to that website. So once again, thank you all for joining. I'm going to sign off here. I'll leave this this screen up here for another minute or so, and hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.